Hey everyone, it's that math magician, and on this video, I'd like to talk about finding the equation of a line through 2 points. So I want to look at this problem number 4 that says we want to find the equation of a line that goes through the points 1, 3 and -5, -15. Okay, so first things first is we have to remember what does the equation of a line look like. And hopefully we can recall that that's going to be y equals mx plus b. Let me go ahead and write m as blue and b as green, where m represents our slope and b represents our y-intercept. Okay, so the most important thing for these problems is just determining what's the slope and what's the y-intercept. So to determine what the slope is, right, slope is denoted by an m, we have this formula that we use that sort of explains to us how we get slope. And the formula for slope is that we take y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And all that's referring to is, and I can rewrite it this way, is that we're really looking at delta y over delta x, the change in y over the change of x. Now where we get these numbers from is from our points here. This is our first point. This is our second point. So since this is our first point, my 1 here is my x1 and my y here is my y1 because they are the first point. That means when I come over to the second point, this -5, which is in the x spot, is now going to be x2, and this y value of -15 will be y2. And in order to find out what my change in y and my change in x is, or to find my slope, I just have to take these points here and plug it into this formula. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have y2 minus y1. Well, my y2 is -15 minus my y1, which is 3, over my x2, which is -5, minus my x1, which is 1. So far, so good. Now we have a fraction. We want to go ahead and simplify the numerator and then the denominator. Well, -15 minus 3 is -18 over, and -5 minus 1 is -6. Our last step is just to simplify that fraction. So -18 divided by -6, well, that just becomes a +3. Okay, so m equals 3. We now know that our slope is 3, all by just figuring out what our change in y and our change of x was by using this formula. For the record, we could have swapped these. We could have called this my x2 and my y2. We could have used this as my x1 and my y1. It doesn't really matter. As long as you do the math in the correct way, you should still end up with 3. Okay, that does not matter. So we have our slope. The very last thing we need to find now is our y-intercept. So let's go ahead and write the information that we have. We know that y equals, we know our slope is 3. We just found that out. X plus, and we still don't know what our y-intercept is. Okay, it's our last step. So we want to figure out what our y-intercept is. I now know what my slope is. It would be really nice if I knew an x and a y value, because if I know an x and a y value, I can just substitute those numbers in and I can solve for b. And the great news is that we actually have 2 different x and y values to choose from. So here's a point where you get to pick which point you want to use. Okay, you can either use the first point or you can use the second point that we'll use to plug into this equation. Now, I'm going to use the first point only because there's no negatives and the numbers are a little smaller, and that tends to make the job a little easier. So I'm going to use the fact, and I'll write it over here to the side. I'm going to use this point 1, 3, where this is my x and this is my y. So instead of writing y equals, I'm now going to write 3 equals. I still have my slope of 3, but now instead of putting x, my x value is going to be 1 plus my b term. And now I have an equation where the only variable that's left is b. The rest are now numbers. I can solve for what b is. Okay, and just so we're clear, I chose to use the first point here. You could also use the second point, and you'll still get the same answer. So let's go ahead and solve this. We got 3 equals, well, 3 times 1 is just 3, plus my b term. So on this right side, I have 3 plus b. I want to isolate b. I want b by itself. So since I'm adding 3, in order to undo that, I need to subtract 3 on both sides. And if I subtract 3, the 3's on the right side, they zero out. So on my right side, I'm now just left with b. I've isolated my y-intercept. And b equals 3 minus 3, well, that also zeroes out. So now I know that b equals 0. So now we have solved what our slope is and what our y-intercept is. So now that I have solved for m, my slope, and I solved for b, our y-intercept, I can now write our final equation. Now remember, our final equation is up here, y equals mx plus b. So now I know that y equals, well, my m we found out was 3, so I have 3x plus our b, which is 0. So you can either write it like this, y equals 3x plus 0, or, because it's kind of redundant to write plus 0, you could just write y equals 3x, and that would also work, okay? Both of those are valid options to use. So hopefully this video helped show you how to find the 2 missing pieces. We need to first solve for m, our slope, when we know 2 points. Once we know our slope, we go ahead and use this formula here to find out what b is, just by plugging in one of the points. And again, I chose 1, 3 just because the numbers looked easier. You could definitely do the same problem with this second point, and you'll still end up with b equals 0. All right, guys, I'll see you next time.